Hi, and welcome back to Continual Expeditions. Tonight, we're going to be leading ourselves down the dark hallways, back alleys, and into some of the more questionable rooms. We're going to be here talking about ghost tours. Before we start going down too many of these back alleys, though, let's introduce everybody who has come down to play guide for the evening. So, Dawn, you were up first.
My name is Dawn Dehel. I write for Ecstasy and Changeling Press. I primarily write erotic romance, but I have several that are very dark.
Beth?
Hey, I'm Beth Dolgner. I write paranormal cozy mysteries and romantic urban fantasy. I am also a former ghost tour guide. I was a guide with the Roswell Ghost Tour for about 5 years.
Alledria?
Hi, I'm Alledria Hurt. I'm an author of horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, and I was once a guide, manager, and trainer for a ghost tour.
Lola?
My name's Lola Strickland. I'm a writer. I'm currently writing a book about a teenage reaper, and I am more of an aficionado. I'm actually more of a fan, so I don't have any credentials when it comes to ghost tours, but I just love ghosty things.
Same.
Liv?
I'm Liv Rancourt, and I write historical and paranormal or paranormal romance, sometimes contemporary, sometimes historical. And my claim to ghost tour cred is that one of the series I co-write with Irene Preston is about a ghost hunting show involving a psychic and a very skeptical historian.
So I want to kind of start with this. Where did you get your start with ghost tours? Because it's a very unique experience. And I mean, especially, I think the first one I got pulled on, I was a kid, and the thing that was always fun to me was you get a different take on history. You get to hear some of the more fun facts, all the small stuff. And I've been on them everywhere from, all over Southeast. I've been to like Waverly Mansion, or gone to mansions out in San Diego and California. I've done part of going around, London and a lot of the different fun places. Going through downtown Dublin, where you're walking through a city that's 1,300 years old, that has plenty of pubs. You're guaranteed to see a spirit at some point in time. My first question is going to be, where did you get your first experience on a ghost tour? Where was it? Let's talk about it a little bit. And so, Dawn, you're up first.
So, although I grew up around ghosty things and visiting houses that were supposedly haunted, my first ghost tour was only about 10 years ago. And I was studying on the Isle of Man. You might have to look where that is. I was on the Isle of Man, and the group I was with discovered that they had a ghost tour that walked you all through Dawlish for €5. And we said, why not? And that was the first one. Of course, it was summer. And even though we didn't start until 10, it was still incredibly light, which kind of takes away from the atmosphere a little bit. But I was hooked at that point. So I did learn a lot of history, but the guide was very local and very knowledgeable. And we got to hear some really dark stories that the average tourist wouldn't get to. And after that, I was hooked. And since then, I've done them all over.
Beth?
So my first ghost tour was many, many, many years ago when I was still a teenager. My family took a vacation to Savannah. And I think ghost tours were still pretty new in the city at that time, which gives you an idea of how long ago this was. But what was great for me was after that, I found a book of local Savannah ghost stories and absolutely loved it. So after that, my tradition was that whenever I traveled somewhere, I would look for a ghost tour to go on, and then I would look for a collection of local ghost stories to take home with me as a souvenir. So I've actually got a huge collection of ghost stories that I've gotten through my travels, and actually had a chance to add my own to that with a collection of Georgia ghost stories that I wrote about 10 years ago. So I blame my career on Savannah is basically what I'm trying to say.
That's where I was born and raised there. So you're welcome.
Alledria?
The funny thing about ghost tours is that I actually didn't get into ghost tours until I started giving them.
Huh.
Because I've always been, well, I've always been into the kind of darker history, but I kind of fell into ghost tours by answering a want ad.
Huh.
So quite literally, they put an ad in the paper looking for actors. I have never acted a day before in my life, but I needed a job. And I figured it can't be that hard. So I learned the then script that was being used by that company at the time, and I dressed the part, and I started giving ghost tours. This would have been back about 2011. So yeah, that was my first instance of dealing with a ghost tour, was literally the day I stepped onto a trolley and had to give a ghost tour.
Lola?
Well, my experience has been virtual because I don't really go anywhere because I work all the time and I'm broke. But during the pandemic, one of my friends from high school, her name's Kristen, I looked her up and she lives in New Orleans now. And she was giving ghost tours, virtual ghost tours. Like I said, this was during can we say the P word? Pandemic.
Yes, we can use that word.
Okay, I couldn't remember. I was like, which one can't we use? I don't remember. And every Friday night, I looked them up. Then their website's gone now, which makes me very sad. But they're called Fright Night NOLA. And they still have their YouTube, and they have some videos on there. Now, they didn't record what they did on Friday nights because they wanted you to pay. And so, you just got to watch it live. So every Friday night, I would watch their tour live. And it was really neat seeing my friend just walking around. Now, on the website, she goes by Camille. So if you watch it and there's no Kristen there, her name's Camille. And it was really neat because I kind of got to catch up with her in a virtual, non-personal way. And, one of the guys who's the tour guide, his name is Cedric Whitaker. And coincidentally, while I was watching this, I was also watching a show called Mystery Decoded on CW, and he was on it. He's considered a vampire. Apparently, he's like a fixture there. His name is Cedric Whitaker. And it's just really neat. I'm like, oh my God, that's the guy, I saw him. So it was really fun. And I found some videos of his from Endless Night Vampire on YouTube. So he's got some more videos. It's just really neat.
Liv?
Well, my history with ghost tours is also tied to New Orleans. I think my now 25-year-old was probably 14. And my youngest had gone on a rather expensive trip with the Boy Scouts. And so my husband and I and our oldest decided we're going on vacation too. We'll go to New Orleans. And when we got there and we're in the French Quarter and we're looking at, all of the tours and all of the things that going on a ghost tour seemed like the most fun to all of us. And it really was. It was really it's a good way of learning. I think Jim, you mentioned this. It's a good way of learning sort of history that's between the lines, kind of. So yeah. And since then we took the Girl Scouts, I think, on the Pike Street Market ghost tour here in Seattle. And the second time we went to New Orleans, we did another ghost tour. So yeah. So,
for anybody who's never actually been on one, who's never kind of gone through that experience, let's sort of set up what's it like? What's the experience? What do you think are the fun parts of it? What should somebody expect? And so let's sort of start there with that. So Beth, I'm going to pick on you for this one.
I'm going to kind of echo what Liv just said, because there is a lot of history, and it's not necessarily the kind of dry, boring history that you would learn in a textbook. I think one of the things I love the most about ghost tours is that you do get to learn the history of a place, but sometimes it's the offbeat stories, the more unusual things that have happened, or even if it is, tied to a better known historic event, it's still a more interesting way of relaying the information to have that ghostly aspect to it. So you can take subjects, like for me, when I would have kids on my tours, subjects that in school they might be bored by, but when you tell it in the context of a ghost story, when you're standing in the shadow of a creepy old mansion, it takes on a whole new life. And I think that's probably something that a lot of first timers don't expect, is just how much we like to ground our stories in the history of the place to really give you a feel for where you are.
Alledria?
That's very true, because a lot of the time it's the history that they don't teach. And it's because that history would be something that might be controversial, that this particular part, especially when you start talking about who won wars and which side was right and how people behaved in instances of dealing with massive, like, emotional and mental trauma, you have entirely different kind of viewpoints that are introduced, that you can introduce in the terms of a story that you might not be able to get away with in a history class.
Lola?
I'm going to let y'all take it because that's a hard question. Y'all seem to be doing a great job with it.
All right, Liv?
What was the question again? No.
Well,
what is it about ghost tours that we didn't expect?
yeah, I mean, well, what is it that you do expect? What is it when you're going on a tour? What's it like for you to be stepping into one, just as, going along on the trip?
I think it gives it the ghost tours that I've gone on have given me a feel for a place that I don't know that I otherwise would have had. I mean, the Seattle Market and Pioneer Square tour. I mean, I've lived in Seattle most of my life, but that, and I know the stories, the Sons of the Prophets, the Doc Maynard, whatever. But connecting the egregious stuff we had to learn in Pacific Northwest history in 8th grade, which granted was a long time ago and I probably don't remember much, but to connect it with real people in the rooms where I'm, there's the underground tour in Seattle, and how did we get to, anyway, it just gives me has given me a feel for a place that I might otherwise not have.
Dawn?
What would I tell somebody who's going for the first time? It really is going to be situational. I have been on ghost tours that were kind of cheesy in the outset, but it was a really good introduction. I took my mom on one. I talked her into one in Kilkenny, Ireland, and they wanted you to wear witch hats and capes. Okay, that's cheesy, but the tour itself was great. It was just sort of the hook, and we're all walking around Kilkenny, past the pubs, wearing witch hats and capes, and it was a good time. And at the other end of the spectrum, I've done incredibly serious, sometimes frightening ones. So you're going to have to kind of get a sense from the website or the building, sort of how serious it is, you're walking into. But for any of them, you're going to go from place to place throughout a town, or I've been on one that was sort of around a very large house as well. And they're going to give you history. They're going to talk about things or what you might see, what to look for, for ghosts. I did a very cool one in Salem. And they really talked about not just the history, but the things that people had seen when they had encounters. Look at this window, look for this thing. This is the kind of thing you might say. So for someone who's going to go on one, just expect the unexpected and roll with it, is what I would, tell them. If you are super scaredy type, you want to do one that's on the cheesier end, because as it gets later, you can get a little freaked out, schlepping through London in the footsteps of the Jack the Ripper. So
Yeah, I kind of laugh about that because just was in London a couple weeks ago. And one of the when we were touring around, one of the places we got to go was Guernsey, which is a nice little island in between, UK and France. It's also the only part of the UK that the Nazis were able to capture and conquer. And so they built facilities all over the all over the island. And so we went and toured one of the, and I'm going to put in very large quotes, medical facilities that was there. And when we had a driver was taking us over, he was very much talking about the fact that how unnerving it is. He sees one of these places that it's an interesting place to go, but he doesn't want to go back in there. He obviously has had it very much was disturbing for him. And so we're walking through it. And it's a self-guided sort of tour thing as you go through. But one of the things is they tell you, yeah, you might see people walking through the halls. Yeah, you might get a little grab here or there. And if you do, just, nod, keep moving, be respectful, that sort of thing. Right. Now, when we went through, it was dank. It was dark. The Haints never like to bother me. So, but as we went through, it was an interesting experience. We were going through another one of the castles over there. And one of the things that they had set up as part of it was they were talking about at that end was the fact that how often different spirits get seen. So, of course, what have they done? They've also set up about 100 feet down the hall a couple of figures that are there in the dark with a periodic strobe, just so you get enough to get that little, it's fun. Also helps break the tension and play with that a little bit. And this kind of builds on that idea of what's serious. How do you go about the storytelling? How do you go about the experience versus some of the ones that don't take it that seriously at all? It's meant to have fun, but you still get to dive into a rather deep experience. So, Alledria, thinking about some of all the tours that you've been on, that you've done and whatnot, and as we talked about a lot of it is all about the history, the historical experience, which often is very personal, right? It's about the human experience of the people that were there that, is often very tragic. A lot of the ones around Savannah, Charleston, New Orleans, going up to the Winchester House, there's definitively tragedy around these stories quite frequently. What's one of the stories that kind of always resonated with you and maybe set in with you a little bit more that somebody might experience? Just from that historical aspect of
it. Historically, I'm pretty sure that this story is not true, but it is an othering story, which has always resonated with me, and it's the story of Renee Rondolia. Excuse me, I'm fighting with a cat about my headphones.
They love headphones.
Your familiar is not happy.
No, my familiar has decided that he wants to be on the floor. So the story of Renee Rondolia is the story of the Savannah Giant. You may have heard of it. And it's a story about someone who, if you look at him from today's standpoint, you would think he was just someone who was most likely autistic with giantism. And it's a story of how he gets accused of murder and killed by a mob. It is a great ghost story if you know how to tell it. But looking at it from 20th century lens, looking back at what this was, you're like, wow, we were kind of horrible people.
Lola, how about you? What's one of those favorite stories?
Well, this is more of a personal story. I've been going to St. Augustine as long as I remember what remember was. And a few years ago, I was at the Castillo del Marcos sure I said that wrong.
Castillo de Marcos. Yeah.
Castillo de Marcos. And when I go, there's this huge plain of grass, just huge, that surrounds it. And so when I go, I ain't got time for sidewalks. Who has time for sidewalks? This is a busy life. We got to go where we got to go. So I cut through the grass. I'm like, whatever. And then one day, I don't know if I saw it on a plaque or someone told me, but it said that there were, it's a burial site. There are all these bodies under there. And I went, I've cursed. I was like, I'm sorry. And I went back to the sidewalk and I'm like, I'll stay on the sidewalk. So now I feel really bad. I'm like, I didn't mean to trample on your graves. I'm so sorry. I didn't know.
Liv, how about you? What's one of your favorite stories?
Probably, anything to do with the French Quarter is I pretty much love. But the one sort of image that has stuck with me is actually from the market tour. I don't know if y'all have been to the Pike Street Market in downtown Seattle. So there's different levels, right? There's like different floors. It's built right up there on the waterfront. And there used to be in the uppermost level ballroom. And in the early part of the 20th century, people would go there and go dancing. Well, now it's been turned into an atrium. So the dance floor is now just open air. But apparently if you're there on the right night with the right moon and whatever, you can see a couple dancing in the air from back when it was a ballroom, which I think is really cool. And every time we go to the market, I haven't been there on the right night with the right, I don't know, phase of the moon or whatever, but it's just a really cool image to me, this ghostly couple swirling around in the air.
Dawn?
So, and probably one of my favorite ghost stories was in Edinburgh, which is it's a very gray city, if that makes any sense, and lots of cobblestones. And of course, when I was there, it was summer, and with their white nights, it's kind of hard to get into the mood. But our tour guide did a fantastic job. And although he told stories about specific people, like the Birking people.
Burke and Hare.
Burke and Hare, yeah. Thank you. Because I knew I was never going to remember the other name. He really talked a lot about the nameless. And as he led us, down consecutively smaller tunnels, we actually went into because Edinburgh was just sort of built up. And when they built the major road through, there were these caverns underneath and they bricked them in. They were supposed to be storage, but people ended up living there. And so this is the end of the 1700s. And he takes us in and you're standing in this vault and you're underneath the city and the river's there and you can sort of vaguely hear traffic. And he just talked about all of the people we don't know. You don't know. These people were lost in their lives and there were 100 people in this room. And then he turned the light off and you're standing in complete and utter darkness. And it was really profound because I know some people were scared, but it was just, it made me really think about the people who were down there in darkness most of the time as they were trying to make a living, picking rope or, all of these other things. And, so for me, what was really remarkable, it was about the forgotten, the nameless. It wasn't one particular story, but it was all the stories we couldn't hear because they were just lost.
Beth?
Ironically, Dawn told the exact story I was going to tell because I'd been in those tunnels in Edinburgh, and you can get a sense of that heaviness and that sorrow because of all the people that suffered down there. I think, there are occasions when I'll go into a place, and I don't claim to have any kind of sensitivity to the paranormal at all. But there are places where I think that suffering does sort of linger. One that comes to mind for me is the Sorrel Weed House in Savannah. They offer regular tours of the house during the day. It's a beautiful historic home, but you can also do ghost tours at the place at night. And down in the basement, there was a room that was a makeshift surgery during I believe it was during the Union occupation of Savannah during the Civil War. And my husband is the biggest skeptic in the world. I am not at all sensitive to the paranormal, but we went into this room and we were kind of, being given time to wander the basement. So it was just he and I in there at the moment. And at the same time, we just looked at each other and said, we need to get out of here. Like, it was just this heavy feeling from these, just imagining these people in there undergoing surgery before really proper anesthesia and the suffering and the pain. And it was almost like that sort of still was lingering in that area. And I think it kind of goes back to what Dawn said. It makes you think about these people whose names we're never going to know, but who suffered in the place that you're standing in now. And I think that is kind of one of the sadder sides of ghost tours, but also important because it makes you, I think, a little more empathetic to the things that have transpired in these places and the history that's happened.
And kind of to build on that, I mean, I've been in a lot of interesting places, so I misspent youth in anthropology and going different places and things like that and studying different things. I've had the benefit of going a lot of places and seeing a lot of things. The idea of the human story to me is what always makes any kind of a tour interesting. It's that, the human victories, human tragedies. And I mean, one of the things about ghost tours is it tends to be that heavier story, that heavier tragedy. So Lola, I'm going to start with you on this one. And, this might be, because again, St. Augustine is a great place for this, being self-accredited as America's most haunted city. And, I think that there's
and oldest.
Definitely the oldest. But looking at some of the stories and that idea of history and experience, when you get to hear that and feel that in that place, I mean, it's very different from seeing it on TV or reading the story. One of those things of being able to stand in a place and hear that experience and get the feel for the land, to look at the lay of the land, to look at the buildings around you, even though a lot of the time they may not be still what it was 100 years ago, 200, 300, 400 years ago. There's still that sense of I'm standing in the spot. So for you on these kind of tours, what does that mean to you in terms of connecting you to these stories?
You read my mind. Because I was just thinking about, this was probably 10 years ago. I have a vivid imagination, very vivid. And sometimes I try to see if I can will things happening. I never have, but I just like to see if I can will things happening. So one day I was hanging out on St. George Street, downtown St. Augustine, and I was sitting on a bench and there was nobody around. So I could look around and kind of imagine what it might have been like in the 1600s. And so I was trying to I was imagining a man turning the corner on a horse with the Spanish black hat that you think of, and, the beard looking like Ponce de Leon or something. I don't know. And I could just imagine. I was trying so hard to will it. And it got to the point where I almost felt like it was going to happen. And, then I felt silly and I stopped. But I was just, come on. I was I think I was hoping for a time slip where I was just going to go back in time and it was going to happen. I was like, come on, the times are merging. I can feel it. Although if that happened, I would freak out. What would I do in 1600 St. Augustine, Florida, except for die as a witch? That's the only thing I could do. That would be my whole thing. I would be burned at the stake as a witch. So I don't know why I thought I wanted to go back to the 1600s. But yeah, it was that feeling I felt like I almost got it. I almost got in tune with that time.
Liv, how about you?
I think that it's probably runs along the stuff I've already said, is that, you get a feel for a place that you might not otherwise have. And, yeah. Sorry, I'm whiffing on this one.
Dawn, how about you?
Salem, Massachusetts. My son, we were doing college tours, and I was like, all right, we're here in Massachusetts. We're going to go to Salem. And I had, in a former life, I was an English teacher. And I must have taught the Crucible. I don't know how many times, and then other books that are around the witch trials and all of these things. But to go on the tour and you're standing in a parking lot and the guide says, "Oh yeah, this is where Giles Corey was pressed to death." You're like, wow. And then you walk around the corner and it's like, well, this is where the jail is. This is where this happened. And that was really profound because it was just words on a page until, I was standing there, and taking pictures, and it kind of, I really wished I could take like all my students on this tour, because you got to feel for just locations and how close things were, and they didn't know where the hanging tree is. And it really kind of paid off later that year because my son was in my class and we read the Crucible, and he could make connections to the work and to the atmosphere, because we're stomping around at night and it was kind of windy, and my daughter, who was, oh gosh, I think 13 at the time, swears she saw a ghost. Still swears. I have the picture that she swears is a ghost. It really helped, I think, long-term at learning. And I think that in the broader picture, ghost stories bring us closer to history, especially the dark stuff that we don't necessarily want to talk about. But we're killing people because we think they're witches. And that's a power. That's very, very powerful, I think.
Yeah.
I think that unless you're living in a very, very new part of your town, history is all around us. And we're so busy going about our daily lives that a lot of times we just don't even notice. And I think doing things like ghost tours is a way to really pause and appreciate. And sometimes it literally does take a tour guide pointing something out and saying, look at the architecture on this building, or look at the way, this tree has grown up around these headstones in the cemetery, whatever it might be. And so I think that, especially if you tend to do any kind of tour, whether it's a ghost tour or just a history tour, when you travel, I think you learn to look at the world in a more appreciative way. And you tend to notice those little details, even in your own town. So I think that it's really a great way of kind of igniting an appreciation for the history and the place when you go on a tour. And I've certainly experienced that with the places that I visited and done tours in.
Alledria?
Savannah's a kind of weird amalgamation of then and now. Because, like, some things have moved on and other things have not. Because there's still ordinances in town that say that you can only build so high. But then there are places where before we started saving buildings, things got bulldozed. So, like, there's an old bus station that got turned into a trolley garage that is sitting on top of the site of a murder. That was a big thing in the paper at one point in time. But then you go to other places like the Sorrel Weed House, which has been standing for almost 200 years. And the history of it is being slowly excavated as it's being renovated. So being able to stand in one place and say, this happened here, is something that it's wonderful if you can get it. But it's awful sometimes to realize that we have destroyed things that we're never going to get back.
So, Liv, thinking about some of the different experiences you've been on, some of the different tours you've been on, where's one that you had just was, a great fun tour? And what was it about that particular tour that just really makes this one of your favorite stories?
I'm going to say the first ghost tour, my favorite ghost tour is probably the first one we went in New Orleans. through the French Quarter, just because it was all so new. It was our first time there, and so much of the history I hadn't really studied yet, and so it was really cool. There's a picture that of my oldest kid in front of the Lalaurie house with like, oh, are those orbs or they're the reflection of someone's headlights? Not sure. But it was a good time. And last year we were back in the French Quarter and we were having dinner in a courtyard restaurant that my husband was convinced a woman had hung herself on a tree in the corner from one of the stories that we heard on our first ghost tour. So it sort of connects us across visits as well as back in time.
Dawn?
My favorite is probably a ghost tour of a house. And it was Loftus Hall, which sits on Hook Head, Ireland. And it's just like this barren spit of land with a little bitty lighthouse at one end and this giant house that's in the middle of it. And the day, like the rain was sideways. I mean, it was just pure atmosphere. But the house had been a number of things. It had been a monastery. It had been a private residence originally. And one of the cool things is there are 3 Titanic, we think of the Titanic staircases. One is at the bottom of the ocean, one is in the Vatican, and the third is sitting in this house. Wow. And so we weren't allowed to walk on it, but we were allowed to go near it. And so, of course, you bring in all of, the Titanic memories, and there's a beautiful stained glass above it. There's a story about the devil that's long and kind of complicated, but there's the hole in the floor that the devil supposedly put. And the house was not derelict, but it was certainly in not a great condition, enough that I've never had a ghost experience that I'm aware of. I'm pretty oblivious sometimes, but if I were going to, it would be in this house. I can absolutely guarantee you it would be in this house because it had, as Beth had said before, just this atmosphere that was kind of thick to it, if that makes any sense. You didn't want to leave the group. And so that's probably my favorite as the creepiest, hands down, that I've ever been on. And sadly, right now, the house is closed. I've heard somebody's bought it. So hopefully they'll bring those back. But that's probably my number one right there.
How about you, Beth?
So I was talking earlier about how as a teenager, we went to Savannah on vacation and my mom fell in love with that city. So years later, after I was grown up and out of college, she packed up and moved to Savannah. And she still lives there today, right in the middle of the historic district in a haunted carriage house, right across from Colonial Park Cemetery. If anybody's been to Savannah, knows where that is. But so that means I have been on many more Savannah ghost tours since that time as a teenager. And my favorite one, hands down, is the haunted pub crawl that I did, where you would stop at a place, have a drink, and hear the ghost story about it, and then move on to the next place. Because let me tell you, whether or not you're a believer in ghosts, you were definitely seeing things by the end of the tour. But we got fortunate and had a really good group of people. Nobody got like out of hand drunk, and we just had a delightful time.
There's a fun one of those in Asheville too.
Ooh, good to know.
I think the one in Charleston's still there, but yeah, the pub crawl, the haunted pub crawl in Asheville's fun. So, Alledria, how about you? What's the most fun, or one, your favorite?
My favorite ghost tour was actually in New Orleans. I went on a City of the Dead tour. And I took my then slightly younger niece. I think she was 15, 16 at the time. She's going to be 18 in like 2 weeks. Good God. But we went on the tour and she's a budding horror buff. So she's like, I can totally take this. girl did not sleep for 2 days after this. I was like, honey, how you gonna do? And you can't sit through a ghost tour and not be terrified at the end of it.
Lola, how about you?
Well, this wasn't a tour so much as me being on substances and loose in New Orleans. So my 21st birthday, I went to New Orleans, my first time in New Orleans. We spent the entire weekend on substances. And I'm generally a scaredy cat, so I'm really surprised I did this. I mean, I was obviously not, myself for the better. So everyone decided we're going to go to Lafayette Cemetery at midnight. So we go up to the gate. The gate was pretty tall, and I'm not limber at all. Even when I was 21, I was not limber. So I was not looking forward to climbing over that gate. So everyone's climbing over, and I'm like freaking out. I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to fall. I'm going to, which I have fallen off of fences before, and it's not fun. And I had to go to the doctor, and she said everything looked okay, but, it certainly didn't feel okay. So I was not looking forward to climbing this gate. So I decided I was going to be smart. I followed the gate down just about, I don't know, maybe 50, 100 yards down, and I found the end of the gate, and I went around, and I came back to them, and I laughed so hard. I laughed, and I did not let them hear the end of it. I'm like, you just had to kind of look. You had to look down a little bit, don't always follow what's in front of you, kind of look around. But we ran around, and it was so quiet, and you could hear your footsteps because it's all concrete. I mean, oh my goodness, and all the mausoleums and everything. I've never been anywhere like that in my life. And I did start to freak out a little bit, like thinking something's going to get me, something's going to come around the corner, shadow. Is that a shadow or is that a thing? But it was fun. And I was just running. We were just all running around. And that's really all I remember. I actually only remember a few things from that whole weekend, but that's one of my stronger memories.
So kind of leading from that in, is there an experience, whether whether it was just something that made you feel eerie, we've talked about a couple of those, or whether it's you just looked and went, okay, yeah, it's time to go, or Dawn, going back to your daughter, certain she acquired a spirit of her own. What's an experience for you that, kind of, again, sets one of those things that may happen on these kinds of tours, whether it was just a case of you convinced yourself because you knew where you were at, or something a little more?
Can you repeat that? I kind of blanked.
When have you had that, let's call it a eerie experience on a tour?
Don't start with me because I can't remember.
Yeah, I have to go back to Loftus Hall. I mean, it's hard to find, and I'm a writer too, to find the correct words to describe the atmosphere. I mean, it was more than the rain that was blowing sideways and the wind, and you could hear the ocean, and there was more to it. There was kind of not a presence, but like the house itself felt the weight of the memories. Do you know what I mean? And if I were going to walk around the corner and into the devil or a ghost or something like that, it would have been in that house. There's just no two ways about it. I remember standing in the ballroom, and they talked about a true story where one of the woman who supposedly played cards with the devil went mad, and they locked her in the ballroom. And I just remember, like, yeah, okay, I want to get out of here now. I just, whether it was just the fact that this woman had been locked in there for so long and slowly went insane, and it had been 300 years previous, or just the sum total that I wanted out. That was great. I was done. Can I go to the gift shop and buy my shirt now? That's where I was. So.
Beth?
I think for me, this isn't eerie, actually. This was actually kind of a fun paranormal experience. When I was a guide with the Roswell Ghost Tour, one of the places we stopped at was it was formerly housing for factory workers. There's an old mill there in Roswell, and it has since been converted into condos. And one of the condos was haunted by the ghost of a little girl. And on my it was either my first or second night, actually, as a full tour guide, giving my first tour, I was standing there with my back to the condo facing my group and talking, and I felt something brush my arm, like just a little touch. And I looked down, and of course there's nothing there. And I just thought, well, maybe it's the little girl, maybe she's just saying like, hey, welcome to the neighborhood, welcome to the tour. And then about a year after that, I was at the same location, and I'm telling my group about, this little girl that haunts the place. And two little kids at the front of my group said, oh, we just saw her walk past the window.
Oh, geez.
And I thought, well, it's kids, like they have very active imaginations. And I turned around and looked, and all I saw was there was a couple that lived there, and I saw the wife. She was upstairs actually drawing the curtains as I turned around and looked. But then about 4 or 5 of the adults in my group said, no, we saw it too. We saw a little girl. She just walked from right to left past the front window on the ground floor. And I think they really did. And I'm so bummed that I didn't see her, because of course my back was to the house because I was addressing my tour group. But we verified the next day. We got in touch with the owners of the condo and said, well, did you guys have like a granddaughter or something visiting with you? And they said, no. It was just the two of us in the house. If you saw a little girl, then it had to have been a ghost, because there was no living little girl with us. So I thought that was really nice, because it is very rare for you to go on a ghost tour and actually experience something paranormal, especially actually seeing a ghost with your own eyes. And the fact that little girl showed up for my tour group just really tickled me. I just thought that was such a cool experience for them and for me.
Alledria?
I used to give the dinner tour for the Pirate's House in Savannah, which involves going down into the remnants of the tunnels that run underneath the building. This is one of those days when I was just like, okay, I'm tired. I'm ready to go. I just want to get this group through here. And then I see a pair of eyes where there shouldn't be any. And I was just like, all right, we're about to make this 10 minutes shorter.
Whereas you could have gone and said, take a look in this corner here. And how about you, Lola?
I can't think of anything on a tour, but this is what happened. I was saying earlier that I have a cousin who lives in Savannah, and she works for some of the historical hotels downtown. And twice I've gotten to stay at the Marshall House, which is like one of the oldest, or maybe the oldest hotel in Savannah. And the first time I went to the section that's supposed to be very haunted. It used to not be hotel rooms. It used to be more like a ballroom, because you can tell when you go down the hallway, there's like a fireplace there. Like, why would there be a fireplace in the hallway? Because that used to like a ballroom or something. So I was told beforehand that people hear bodies being like dragged down the hallway. And also there's a ghost cat. So I was already told ahead of time this could happen. But I was laying in bed and I heard what sounded like bodies being dragged across the floor. Now, it can be explained away. There's the fireplace right there, and so it could be picking up noises from other places, but it was still freaky. Now, what cannot be as easily explained. So I was laying there. I couldn't go to sleep because bodies, on the carpet, whatever. So I'm just laying there. And you know how in hotels they have those little shampoos and stuff? So we hadn't moved them. The shampoos were still like standing up above the sink on a little sill they have above the seat. So I just heard one little shampoo bottle just go boom, like something knocked it off. Kind of like if a cat was threading through the bottles and one knocked over. So I'm just laying there. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? And I can't like move. And then I heard jingle kind of going around my neck like a bell on a cat. And it was just like jingle, 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 just like going all around my neck. And at that point, I'm just like, so yeah, that's my ghost story from the Marshall house.
Liv?
Wow, I don't know that I can top the ghost cat. I don't know that I've had any spooky experiences on a ghost tour per se. I can get myself way more freaked out in my own basement because I'm convinced the old guy that we bought this house from 20-something years ago is still down there. He doesn't do much. He sometimes turns the light switch off and on in our bedroom, but other than that, he'll play with the closet door in our bedroom. I think that's, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I did have sort of a weird experience at Lafayette No. 1, the cemetery in the Garden District of New Orleans. But it had to do with sort of my own work. Like, we went there on our first visit with the kid, wandered around. It was really cool. And then, stop. Sorry, my alarm just went off. I set a scene there in a book that I was working on. And so the next time I went back, I had trouble remembering, okay, it was like I had layers of memory that, okay, this was, did that happen in the book? Anyway, it was just kind of oddly disorienting, trying to figure out what was real and what I had just made up in my own damn mind.
That's every day.
It's hell to be a writer.
Really? It's like,
So, kind of looking at wrapping up, one of those things that we started with is what can you expect on a ghost tour and everything else? But the other side of it, I think, is about the etiquette, right? How can you be a good guest? How can you have good etiquette both for the city and the people that are there, and maybe the people that are still just hanging around? So, Beth, from your perspective, what is it? How what's good etiquette? What makes a good guest?
I mean, I would say certainly just being respectful to your guide, and paying attention when they're talking, but also being respectful of the neighbors. A lot of times you're passing by people's houses. So of course you should have fun. Of course you should be enjoying yourself, but maybe just keep your volume down when you're going from stop to stop so that you're not going to be waking up the neighbors. So I think I think it's mostly common sense. But I think you can have fun without being a jerk.
Alledria?
Do not try to take pieces of the places home with you.
Do people do that on your tours? Oh my goodness.
People have tried that. They have literally tried to pry pieces off of old houses or bricks that they look like they're loose. And they're like, well, why can't I? No, you cannot. Put it back.
That's how you get haunted.
Yes, you take it home with you.
Yeah,
no,
it doesn't belong to you. Leave it.
Lola?
Don't walk on burial grounds, even accidentally.
Liv?
I'd say stick with your group, and don't go, especially if you're in some place where a house where they're okay to walk here, not okay to walk here. Don't go over there where it's not okay to walk.
Be respectful.
Dawn?
I think to couple with Alledria, don't leave a part of yourself there either. Because I'm sure the same people that were taking bricks were trying to leave initials, or I've seen people try to do dumb stuff like that. I would just say be open. You're doing this tour for a reason. Be open to and sensitive to the stories, because there's some that are very tragic. But you never know. You could see a ghost, which would be cool. I'd be sad if I missed the little girl ghost too.
So before we get out of here, Let me ask this. What's the one thing that around ghost tours and everything we haven't talked about that you think we ought to mention or talk about? So, Alledria, what is it for you?
Know the age range for the tour that you're on. Your baby may not be appropriate on certain tours. Please don't bring the stroller to the pub crawl.
Lola?
There are virtual tours you can do online. If you don't think you're going to Europe anytime soon, pay a little money and you get to see it through a lens.
Liv?
Gosh, what have we not talked about? I'm sorry, I'm pulling a blank. I guess I would say make sure when you are planning a trip someplace that you've never been before, check out the ghost tours and include that as part of your party planning or vacation planning.
Dawn?
You're going to be walking. Don't complain about walking. You're really complaining about the fact that you're walking on a walking tour, and tip your guide. Even in Europe, tip your guide if they do a good job. Write that review. Take the 2 seconds and write nice job or something on a TripAdvisor or whatever, because this is how some people make a livelihood.
Yeah, and don't wear high heels on cobblestone streets.
I can tell you stories, not high heels, just cobblestone streets.
Beth, what's your one thing?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. Whether it's about ghosts or about the history of a place. And if you don't want to ask it in front of the whole group, then just chat with your guide while you're walking to the next stop. They're always happy to talk about it because this is a subject they're passionate about.
Well, I think now that we've got everybody ready to start their ghost tours for the fall season, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys and your own tales of terror, woe, and love. So, Dawn, where can everybody find you?
You can find me, the easiest way is at DSDehel, DEHEL, looks like Dehel, very appropriate for this time of year, .com, and there's links to all of my stories from there. There's some Halloween ones too.
Beth?
You can find me online at bethdolgner.com. If my last name is too hard to spell for you, you can also find me at eternalrestbnb.com.
Alledria?
AlledriaHurt.com/books if you're looking for something that I've already written.
Lola?
You can find me online. I'm now on Blue Sky, so I'm one of the newest. I'm Lola Writes on Blue Sky.
And Liv?
LivRancourt.com. I am also on most, social media things with some variation of Liv Rancourt.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host this evening, Jim Nettles, and you can find me at jamespnettles.com, AuthorEssentialsWorkshops.com, SpeculativeFictionAcademy.com, ReadingPros.com, and of course, your ConTinual. And we will see you again soon on this side of the veil or the other.